The chair had been at the head of that table for 41 years. Daniel had built it himself, sanded every edge, stained it the color of autumn oak. So when his son pointed at it and said, "Dad, I don't think you should sit there tonight," the silence that followed wasn't just uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that rearranges a man's entire understanding of his life. Daniel Mercer had always believed that a family was like a table, only as strong as the joints holding it together. He had built enough of them in his woodworking shop behind the house to know that the most dangerous cracks weren't the ones you could see. They were the ones hiding just beneath the finish, invisible until the weight of something important came pressing down. He was 67 years old the Thanksgiving that changed everything. Not old enough to feel forgotten, but old enough to feel the shift, that quiet, creeping displacement that comes when a man realizes the house he built no longer quite belongs to him. His wife Margaret had passed 3 years before. Pancreatic cancer, swift and merciless. She had been the one who set the table, who counted the chairs, who made sure Daniel's place at the head was always laid first. Without her, the rituals of the house had quietly migrated into the hands of his daughter-in-law, Renee. Renee was not a cruel woman. Daniel understood that even then, even in the worst moments of that evening. She was simply a woman who had married into an old architecture and needed to make it her own. She rearranged furniture. She switched the side the towels hung on. She moved the good china from the cabinet Margaret had chosen to a different one she liked better. Small things, understandable things. But Daniel still felt them, each one like a nail pulled quietly from a beam. The night it began. He had arrived early, the way he always did, 40 minutes before anyone else, with 2 bottles of wine he'd selected carefully, and a pecan pie he'd baked from Margaret's handwritten recipe card, the one still stained with vanilla extract from 1987. He liked to arrive early so he could sit in the kitchen while things were being prepared, not to help exactly, but to be present in the warmth of it. The house smelled of roasting turkey and wood smoke. His son, Marcus, was somewhere upstairs with the children, 2 grandkids, Lily, 9, and Cooper, 6, who made the whole journey worth it. Daniel had driven 2 hours for this meal, the same 2 hours he had driven every Thanksgiving and Christmas for the past 14 years, ever since Marcus and Renee had bought the old Victorian on Caldwell Street. He set the wine on the counter. He placed the pie beside the others already cooling on the rack. Renee thanked him warmly enough, cheeks flushed from the oven, distracted in the way hosts always are an hour before guests arrive. The guests, that was the first hint, though Daniel hadn't noticed it then. "We've got about 15 coming tonight," Renee had said, not looking up from the gravy she was whisking. "Mostly my family, some of Marcus's work friends. It's going to be a full house." Daniel had smiled and said that sounded wonderful. He meant it. He liked a full table. He went to the dining room to see how things were set up and noticed immediately that the table had been extended with the leaf, stretching it long and elegant beneath the chandelier. Renee had laid it beautifully, cream linens, the good crystal autumnal centerpieces with dried orange slices and sprigs of rosemary. 15 place settings arranged with care. He counted them twice. His usual chair, the one at the head, had a different arrangement around it. A reserved placard handwritten in calligraphy read, "Renee's father, Gerald." Daniel stood there a moment, studying it. Then he looked down the length of the table and found a seat near the middle, between what appeared to be spots reserved for 2 of Renee's cousins he'd met once at a wedding. His name wasn't written anywhere. He assumed it was simply the empty space beside the bread basket. He told himself it was fine. He told himself this firmly, the way a man tells himself things are fine when he is not yet ready to feel how much they aren't. The words that changed everything. Guests arrived in waves. Renee's parents first, then her 3 siblings with their spouses, then the children, then Marcus's co-workers. 2 young men Daniel didn't know who laughed loudly and smelled of expensive cologne. The house filled and swelled and grew warm with conversation. Daniel found Marcus in the hallway and they embraced. His son was 41 now, with silver threading his temples and the same broad shoulders Daniel had watched develop from a skinny teenager's frame. There was love between them. Daniel had never doubted that. But there was also, increasingly, a distance he couldn't quite name. The kind that grows not from anger but from busyness, from years of parallel lives pulling in different directions. "Good to see you, Dad." "Good to be here, son." They said these things and meant them. And then Marcus was pulled away by someone wanting to show him something on their phone, and Daniel was alone again in the warm, crowded room. When Renee's mother called everyone to the table, Daniel moved toward his seat, the one he'd identified earlier, near the middle. He pulled out the chair and was just settling into it when Marcus appeared at his elbow. "Actually, Dad," Marcus stopped. He looked uncomfortable in the way only sons can look around their fathers, guilty and defensive at once. "Renee's got the seating arranged. That's for her cousin Delia." "Oh, sorry," Daniel straightened. "Where am I then?" Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He glanced toward the kitchen, where Renee was carrying out the turkey. Then he looked back at his father, and in his eyes Daniel saw something he had never seen there before, a kind of apologetic helplessness, as though he were a man caught between two loyalties and had already, quietly, made his choice. "We've got you at the kids' table this year, Dad. Just, there wasn't enough room with Gerald and Shirley and—" "The kids' table," Daniel repeated. It wasn't the table. He would have eaten standing in the kitchen if it had come to that. It was the next words, the ones Marcus said quietly, leaning close, clearly trying to keep them private. "Look, I know it's not ideal, but this is Renee's night, okay? And honestly, Dad," a pause, loaded as a held breath, "I don't think you should try to make it about you. Just sit wherever she's put you and let tonight be easy." He didn't say you don't belong here. He didn't have to. The implication settled into the room like cold air under a door. Several heads turned. Renee's sister, two of the cousins, Gerald himself, who had the grace to look away immediately. Young Cooper, Daniel's 6-year-old grandson, looked up from his seat with wide eyes that understood nothing and absorbed everything. Daniel did not move for a moment. He was aware of his own heartbeat, of the chandelier light warm above the table, of Margaret's pecan pie cooling on the counter in the next room, baked from a card she had written in her looping, hurried handwriting before the world changed. He thought about what a man is supposed to do in a moment like this. He had spent a lifetime believing in the quiet dignity of restraint. Margaret used to say he swallowed more than he should. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was the accumulated weight of all those swallowed moments pressing up at once. He looked at his son. Marcus was already half turning away, the conversation considered closed. Around them, 15 people held their breath without knowing they were doing it. And then Daniel Mercer did something no one in that room expected. He smiled. Not a wounded smile, not the tight, brittle smile of a man holding something back. A real one, slow and deep and carved from somewhere private. He straightened his collar, smoothed the front of his sweater and said, in a voice clear enough for the whole room to hear, "You know, I built this table." Silence total, the kind that presses against your ears. 41 years ago, I built it in the garage on a Saturday in October while your mother was inside making soup. She came out and saw me sanding it and she said, "Daniel, what on earth are you making?" And I told her, "A table big enough for everyone we'll ever love." He paused. Gerald, at the head of the table, set down his fork. Renee appeared in the doorway from the kitchen, holding the carving knife utterly still. "I'm not telling you this to make anyone feel bad. I'm telling you because it's the truest thing I know about this family. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday dinner, that table held us. It held arguments and laughter and the year Marcus broke his collarbone, and we all signed his cast right there at dessert. It held the night we told you your grandmother had died. It held the morning after Margaret's diagnosis, when none of us could eat, and we all just sat around it anyway because there was nowhere else to be. His voice did not crack. That surprised even him. A table doesn't care who sits at the head of it. A table just wants to be used for what it was built for. So wherever Renee needs me to sit tonight, I'll sit there. Gladly. Because the point was never the chair. No one spoke for what felt like a very long time. It was Lily who moved first, Daniel's 9-year-old granddaughter. She slid out of her chair at the kids' table in the adjoining room, walked directly to her grandfather and took his hand. She didn't say anything. She simply held it, the way children hold things they don't want to lose. Then Gerald, Renee's father, a retired Marine whom Daniel had spoken to perhaps a dozen times over the years, stood up from the head of the table. He was a tall man, thick through the chest, with the kind of face that didn't show much. He picked up his nameplate, set it down beside the chair in the middle, and looked at Daniel. "Sit here," he said simply. "I'll move." "Gerald, you don't have to." "I know I don't." Gerald pulled out a middle chair and sat down in it without ceremony. "But I'm going to." After. Renee set the turkey down and cried. Not dramatically, she wasn't a dramatic woman, but quietly, turning back to the kitchen on the pretense of fetching something, pressing a dish towel to her face. Marcus went to her. Daniel watched his son hold his wife in the kitchen doorway and felt something soften in his chest that had been hardening for years. When they came back to the table, Marcus sat down beside his father. Not across, beside. He didn't apologize right away. That came later in the driveway, long after the dishes were done and the guests were gone. What he did was reach over and briefly, firmly, squeeze his father's arm. The way men say things they don't yet have words for. Dinner was extraordinary in the way dinners only become when something real has happened in the room. People talked more honestly than they had in years. Gerald told a story about his own father, a Hungarian immigrant who used to make him sit at a separate table from the adults until he was 16. "I hated it," Gerald said, "and then one day my father explained why. He said the adult table is where we carry the weight of the family. He was protecting me. I never forgot it." Renee's sister, a quiet woman named Patricia who had barely spoken all evening, leaned toward Daniel and said, "Your wife sounds like she was incredible." "She was the best person I ever knew," Daniel said, "which is a high bar because I've known some very good people." He meant it as a compliment to the room, and the room received it as one. Cooper, his youngest grandchild, climbed onto his lap after pie was served and fell asleep there with his cheek against Daniel's chest, his small fingers curled around the button of Daniel's sweater. Daniel sat very still, not wanting to disturb him, and ate his second slice of pecan pie one-handed. The recipe card. He had remembered to bring it. He'd slipped it into his shirt pocket when he was packing, a habit he'd developed in the first year after Margaret, carrying small pieces of her with him on the days that mattered. He felt it now against his ribs, thin and worn as a whisper. The driveway. It was past 10 when the last guest left. The children were asleep upstairs. Renee and Patricia were inside at the kitchen table with wine, and the particular quiet conversation that comes only after a long evening among women who have said what needed saying and are now past it. Marcus walked his father to the car. The November air was sharp and clean, their breath clouded between them. "Dad, Marcus stopped. He looked at the sky the way men do when they're trying to organize themselves. "I don't know what I was thinking. I was stressed and I let Renee's anxiety become mine and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair." "No," Daniel said, "it wasn't." "I'm sorry." "I know you are." There was a pause. An owl called somewhere in the dark trees lining the street. "You weren't wrong, though," Daniel said. "Not entirely. I have made things about me sometimes. Your mother used to tell me, I can take up a lot of space without meaning to." "That's not." "I'm not letting you off the hook," Daniel said and smiled. "I'm saying we can both be true at the same time. That's what growing up is. Realizing two things can be real together." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. He was 41 years old, and in that moment he looked to Daniel exactly like the boy he'd been at 12, caught between wanting to defend himself and knowing, somewhere deeper, that there was nothing to defend. "She was the one who suggested the table, by the way," Marcus said quietly. "Renee. She was the one who said we should use it when we moved here, because she said she wanted our house to have something in it that had already held a family. She said it would give our kids roots." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "She never told me that." "No, she's not. She doesn't always say the thing she means. She shows it. You should know that about her." "I'll work on that," Daniel said, "seeing people more clearly. I've got a few years left to practice." Marcus laughed, a real laugh, loose and surprised. He hugged his father tightly then, the way men hug when they mean it and know that time is not infinite and are beginning, finally, to let that knowledge guide them. What he carried home. Daniel drove the 2 hours back in comfortable silence. No radio, just the dark road and the occasional lights of other lives moving in opposite directions. He thought about the table, about the Saturday he had built it, the smell of sawdust in October and the soup Margaret was making inside. He had not known then what it would hold. He had not known about Cooper sleeping against his chest, or about Marcus's silver temples, or about the years ahead that still hadn't happened. He thought about Gerald, sitting calmly in the middle of the table, unbothered, whole, a man secure enough in himself not to need the head of anything. He thought about Renee, who had chosen his table for her home because she wanted her children to have roots. She had never said it to him, but she had shown it, every holiday, every dinner, every time she polished its surface and laid it with Margaret's good china. He reached into his shirt pocket and touched the recipe card, still there. A table doesn't care who sits at the head of it. He had believed that when he said it. He believed it more now. What mattered was not the chair or the nameplate or the particular angle from which a man surveyed the room. What mattered was showing up, staying, being present enough that when a 6-year-old boy curled his fingers around a button and fell asleep, he felt safe enough to do it. Daniel Mercer pulled into his driveway at midnight. The house was dark and quiet. He sat in the car for a moment before going in, not from sadness, not exactly, but from the particular fullness that comes after a long day in which something old has been repaired and something new has been built. He thought Margaret would have liked tonight. Then he corrected himself. Margaret would have liked how it ended. He went inside. He made himself a cup of tea. He sat at his own small kitchen table, the one he'd built for two, now set for one. And in the lamp-yellow quiet of his own home, he felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not fixed, not finished, not without grief. But held, still held by something larger than the chair he sat in. By the joints of a family that bent and cracked and held and bent again, the way all good tables do, not because they are perfect, but because someone once took the time to build them right. The point was never the chair. The point was who comes back to the table.